This video was brought to you by Ground News. Yesterday, Americans went to the polls to elect the House of Representatives, a third of the Senate, and most importantly, their new president. The pre-election polls were impossibly tight and implied that both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump could have won. In the end, however, as the results have rolled in over the past few hours, it became apparent that, as he did in 2016 and 2020, Trump had outperformed the polls. And by the time this video comes out, he may have already been declared the winner. So in this video, we're going to look at the results so far, and why Trump will probably be the next president of the United States. Before we get into it, we were up all night writing and animating this video, so let me quickly tell you about our magazine Too Long. This is the high-quality physical magazine that we make every 4 months, and this time dives into every major election that took place in 2024, including, obviously, the US election. So if you want our full analysis of the US election, what the winner is likely to do next, whether that be Trump or Harris, our review of the Biden administration, as well as coverage from elections around the world, then consider picking up a copy. There's a link to the store in the description where you'll also find a full video explaining the magazine. So commemorate this massive election, support our journalism, and experience our very best reporting with Too Long. So before we get into the results, a quick recap of how American elections work. This might be stupidly obvious to some of you, and if you've heard enough about the Electoral College, then you can skip ahead. But for everyone else, American presidential elections are not won by the popular vote. Rather, they're won by the Electoral College. In short, every state gets a certain number of electoral votes, which roughly correspond with the size of their population. The total number of electoral votes available is 538, which means that a candidate needs 270 votes or more in order to win. In 48 out of the 50 states, and in Washington, D.C., which gets 3 electoral votes thanks to the 23rd Amendment, whoever wins the most votes in that state gets all of the electoral votes. But Maine and Nebraska do things slightly differently, allocating 2 electoral votes to the state's popular vote winner, and then 1 electoral vote to the popular vote winner in each congressional district. Anyway, most states aren't actually all that competitive, and we basically knew who was going to win in advance. According to Nate Silver's forecast, for instance, 21 states and Washington, D.C. had a greater than 85% chance of going for Harris, collectively accounting for 226 electoral votes, while 23 other states had a greater than 85% chance of going for Trump, collectively accounting for 218 electoral college votes. That means that, leaving aside Maine's 2nd district, which was probably always going to go for Trump anyway and only accounts for a single electoral vote, the entire race hinged on the 7 remaining so-called swing states. Nevada, which gets 6 electoral votes, Wisconsin, which gets 10, Arizona, which gets 11, Michigan, which gets 15, Georgia, which gets 16, North Carolina, which also gets 16, and Pennsylvania, which gets 19, and has therefore been the focus of much of the campaign. Anyway, the polls going into the election had almost all of these races neck and neck, with the exception of Arizona, where Trump apparently held a 2.4-point lead. Nate Silver's aggregator had every swing state within basically a 1-point margin, which is basically why Silver, along with almost all other pollsters, gave each candidate roughly equal chances of winning the Electoral College. In his final pre-election forecast, Silver actually gave Harris a literally 50.0% chance of winning, while The Economist gave her a 56% chance, and 538 gave her a 50% chance. However, with the results rolling in over the past few hours, it's looking more and more like Trump has, once again, outperformed the polls. As of about 1 a.m. Eastern Time, North Carolina and Georgia have both been called for Trump. Arizona also looks likely to go for Trump, because while only 53% of the votes have been counted, Trump currently holds a slight lead, and the remaining votes are due to come from Trump-leaning areas, especially Maricopa County, which includes the city of Phoenix. When it comes to Nevada, their vote normally takes unusually long to count, but provisional data collected by John Ralston of the Nevada Independent suggests that it's basically a toss-up. But because it only accounts for 6 electoral college votes anyway, it's unlikely to be decisive. Anyway, assuming Arizona does indeed fall for Trump, this means that Harris would probably need to win all 3 blue wall swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, in order to win the Electoral College overall. And unfortunately for Harris, this looks basically impossible. largely because, as of 2 a.m. Eastern Time, Pennsylvania looks overwhelmingly likely to go for Trump, with many networks calling it as a Trump victory. And it's not just Pennsylvania either. Trump also looks likely to win Michigan and Wisconsin, although this isn't yet certain because of the lower percentage of respective votes that are being counted. Now, we should stress that, as of the time of writing, the results aren't yet certain. There are still millions of votes to come, and a whole load of states are yet to be called. Nonetheless, the consensus is that a Trump victory is overwhelmingly likely. The New York Times currently gives Trump more than a 95% chance of winning the election, and is predicting that he'll get just over 300 electoral votes. The Times even now predicts that Trump will win the popular vote, which is pretty incredible given what the polls were saying before the election. The betting and prediction markets broadly concur. Polymarket currently gives Trump a 97% chance of winning, and even suggests that Trump has a 92% chance of winning the popular vote too. And it's not just the presidency either. Republicans have also flipped the Senate. Republican candidates have flipped seats in Ohio and West Virginia, and held on in Texas, Florida, and Nebraska, which means that they already have 51 seats in the chamber. While the House is harder to call at this time, polls before Tuesday had it as a toss-up. So if the Republicans outperform the polls there in the same way they have in the presidential and Senate races, they could win an outright trifecta. All in all, this is looking like a pretty catastrophic night for the Democrats, who will doubtless spend the next few months, if not years, blaming each other and arguing how to best diagnose this loss. However, from a certain perspective, this result shouldn't be all that surprising. After all, Democrats did switch out their candidate, who's still the president, just months before the vote, having spent the preceding year or so adamantly insisting that Biden was fit for another term. And even though Harris has enjoyed a boost in the polls, she's never been all that popular and has always struggled to shift back to the center, having shifted to the left in 2019. On top of that, incumbents worldwide have been struggling in the polls, largely because voters apparently just really hate inflation. So what happens next? Well, honestly, no one knows. It might be that, like his first term, Trump's second term ends up being a bit underwhelming and nowhere near as catastrophic as the liberal-leaning bits of the American media often suggest. Alternatively, however, Trump's second term might end up being far more, shall we say, dramatic than his first, given the Republican dominance in Congress and the fact that many of the checks and balances that moderated him first time round no longer exist. Ultimately, we'll just have to wait and see. That's not to say that there's not a lot more to follow along with the next few days likely to be full of drama from the US election. And when it comes to absorbing all of that chaos, thankfully, there's Ground News, a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. They pull in articles from all over the world and organize them by story. And every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of all of the sources reporting, all backed up by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. For instance, take this story about the RNC suing Milwaukee over apparent poll watcher limits. Right away, you can see that the story had 21 outlets reporting on it. Of these, just 21% lean left, while 53% lean right, meaning you're far more likely to miss this story if you yourself are on the left. Then you can swipe through some of the headlines to see just how different some of the reporting can be based on these biases. For instance, on the left, the Huffington Post emphasizes the state's rejection of the claims, while right-wing outlets like Fox or the National Review imply foul play by calling them late-game changes and arbitrary. They also have a special election page to help you follow along with the breaking news. You can also read specific stories for each candidate, including the major platform issues and even blind spots, stories underreported by one side of the political spectrum or the other. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I can't recommend it enough. I know I've personally benefited enormously from Ground News. I've gotten better at spotting political bias, and I've surprisingly challenged some of my own views. In fact, if you subscribe today, you'll get 50% off their Vantage plan, which includes unlimited access to their election pages, blind spot feed, and many other features that empower you as a news consumer. This is their biggest discount yet, so go to ground.news/TLDR, scan the QR code on screen, or use the link in the description to subscribe today.